You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring the scripture and all things related to it. New episodes are released daily. For more information, check out glossahouse.com and subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube. Welcome and enjoy.
Shalom and welcome to this episode of SLA Insights. My name is Dr. Jennifer Noonan, and we're continuing a discussion of reading and reading different activities for reading fluency. The goal is fluency in Hebrew, Greek, Latin, but this could be applicable to really any second language learning. In previous episodes, I've talked about an extensive reading program, reading rate practice, and in this episode, I'm going to talk about rereading and recycling texts. The goal here is to encourage students to reread and recycle the texts that they've already read to promote reading fluency. So as a student reads a text again and again, he or she is likely to pick up words and phrases more quickly. They'll eventually, hopefully, automatize some of those lower level processes, speed up the reading process, and therefore free up working memory for higher level reading skills. So the goal here is similar to the reading rate practice, but kind of coming at it from a different angle. So doing rereading frequently with a large variety of texts is going to help even more to give the learners opportunity to recognize, automatize words, phrases, but also their reading skills. Now, I understand that too much reading and rereading of the same text can get redundant. So one of the goals in rereading texts is to incorporate variety. So if you're giving them the same text, ask them to do something different each time around. So for example, maybe one time they complete a summary of the text. Another time they take a comprehension quiz. Another time they may read it and fill in an outline as they go. Or another time look for structure signals. Another time they may write a paper on it, taking a position on a particular issue brought in. So there are a variety of ways of creating variety as you reread the same text over and over. So here's one suggestion about how to do it. Now, before I get started, rereading and recycling are very similar in that you're reusing the same text, but it's going to be slightly different in that rereading it may be used the same day or at least the same week, using the same text over and over. Whereas recycling, there's going to be some space in between where the learner is improving vocabulary, grammar, whatnot, and so as you reread the text in a recycling situation, you're going to be coming at it with new knowledge, different knowledge. And so the approach is going to be slightly different, although very similar. So I'm going to start with how to do a rereading activity and then move into a recycling activity. So for the rereading activity, again, we're assuming that you're going to reread it in the same class period or perhaps in the same week, but not much beyond that. So the repetitions are going to be closely spaced together. So what you want to do is choose a passage, and for this, let's think perhaps a parable. The parable of the rich young ruler is great because there are two people in dialogue, and so you can put the students in pairs, and they can work together in pairs, as you'll see coming up. But you could use other stories, other parables, and just adapt based on how many characters are in the story. You want to look for a text that either the students already know 95 to 98% of the words in the passage, or one that you can adjust so that they know 95 to 98%. You may want to simplify it, you may want to create a diglot weave, you may want to pre-teach the vocabulary and grammar they need for that text. But again, make sure that they know 95 to 98% so that they can comprehend, because again, we want them comprehending the text, not just reading to see how fast they can say it. So in the first encounter, the teacher is going to read the text out loud with the students following along with their own text in front of them. The second encounter, the students are going to be put into pairs. Again, assuming you're working with a Rich-Young ruler, this works well for pairs, but you may need the groups to be bigger if you have more characters, as we'll see later on. The students in their groups, whether it's pairs or more, will need to read the text, take turns reading the text to each other. Those who are not reading but listening are going to be actively listening and helping to correct along the way. Now, between encounters 2 and 3, we're going to put a comprehension quiz. The point of this is to make sure that the students are reading for comprehension and not just reading for pronunciation. Once they've done the comprehension quiz, they're going to get to their third encounter. And this third encounter is where they work in groups or pairs, depending on the number of characters, to act out the story in a kind of reader's theater. You're not expecting them to memorize the dialogue necessarily, but to read it out back and forth to each other, acting it out as they do so. And so that will give them a third exposure to that same passage. And then the fourth encounter is going to be that they write about that passage. Assuming the parable, we're going to write about the original language version, the Greek of the parable. Now, this could be, you could take this several different directions. It could be an analysis or an exegesis of the passage. It could be perhaps a devotional based on the passage. And, doing something like that normally assumes that they're writing in L1, in their native language. But it could be done in L2, making the assumption that it will be simpler if they're going to be writing in L2. So that's one suggestion for how to do a rereading activity, getting the students to read the text more than once so that they can start that automatizing process of the lower level skills, free up working memory, so that they can really get to comprehension and interpretation. Now, the next example I'm going to give is that of recycling a text. And this is, the expectation is the intervals will be spaced longer, with maybe 2 weeks or so in between. And I'm going to share my screen here for an example. This is a Hebrew example from Exodus chapter 3. So this passage here, I have 3 iterations. The top one is going to be given around lesson 8 of the particular curriculum that we're using. The second one around lesson 10, and then the third around lesson 12, roughly, give or take. Now, between each of those lessons, the students are going to be gaining both vocabulary and grammar information. And so the first iteration of the text here from Exodus 3, you notice I've added some ellipsis points at places where I've just removed things that are not essential to moving the story forward. And in other places, I've glossed, as here, and I've not just a gloss, but I've replaced English with the Hebrew, because this is a Hebrew word they haven't encountered yet. So the first iteration has some gaps in the text, but it's something that they can understand at the 95 to 98% level. So they're going to read it, and they're going to answer some questions based on the text. Then, a couple weeks later, we're going to bring the same text back, but notice I've added some new things here. First of all, we still have some gaps, but here, at the end of the first line, I have Hineni, which is the Hebrew replacing where I just glossed with English, because now, at this level, the students know this word. And so they're going to recycle it, use the text again, and start seeing things that they now understand that they didn't before. And it's a way of reinforcing it, kind of like the rereading, but it's also providing motivation for them to say, look what I can do now. I didn't know this before, but now I do. And now I'm getting a fuller picture of this text and how it works. Similarly here, in the second line, I skipped this second phrase, al tikrav, and I'm providing here because that's a vocab word they don't know yet at this point, was not in the second line for the first iteration. But now here it is in the second because now they know, they understand that construction, the al plus a prefix verb that they can work with. And so continuing with this, we continue on to the third iteration, and notice again, it's a little longer because I've added even more. There are fewer ellipsis points, the text is more complete, but I've added in a little bit more English to make it work because there's still some vocabulary and grammar items that they don't know yet, that they haven't learned. But this gives them a full text, something they can work with to comprehend, and continue to read and reread and say, now look how far I've come. So that's an example of recycling a text, where you're using the same text over and over, but doing it with added material each time. So, by way of review, today we've talked about rereading and recycling texts as one more way, one more specific, hopefully practical example you can take with you to use in your classrooms and promote reading fluency. The goal, again, is to push learners to read faster and more efficiently so they have enough working memory left to engage in the higher level skills, comprehension, interpretation, and so on, which really is the heart of exegesis. This is our main goal for many of us teaching the biblical languages. Now, in the upcoming episode, I'm going to kind of create a pivot point and start talking about vocabulary, because one of the most important ways to promote reading fluency is to make sure the students have good word recognition skills, and that requires vocabulary. So as I transition from reading skills to vocabulary skills, we're still talking the same goals. We're still trying to promote reading fluency, interpretation, comprehension, but we're going to do it through the lens of vocabulary learning. So in the upcoming episodes, I'm going to be talking about some theoretical things, what we know about how learners understand, gain new vocabulary, but then some practical ways to promote vocabulary learning. So I hope you can join me for these upcoming episodes, and in the meantime, have a great week.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.